episode of Shadows from the Tree, we delve into the darker side of genealogy by exploring stories pulled from newspaper archives and using historical records to find the truth behind them. Specifically, this episode focuses on the theme of scandals and the impact it had on the lives of those involved. Join us as we shed some light on those often overlooked stories and gather a deeper understanding of the challenges those involved face. Welcome.
Welcome.
Alrighty, so we decided to look at some scandals for this week's episode, and I will be honest, I looked at a lot of different stories, and even up until yesterday I was debating which story I wanted to go with. So I have a lot of notes, and so hopefully I'll be able to remember them all. So I found this story about It was titled, let me get that for you. It was Scandalous Bathing Suits Taboo on City Beaches Declares Policewoman.
Whoa.
So have you ever thought about the history of bathing suits?
I mean, I've seen like old movies and old pictures where like they would just wear clothes and go swimming in their clothes back in like the Victorian era, and then it got less and less as time went on.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I barely knew probably about some of it, which is even more shocking because I would have thought I would have heard some stuff about it. And it really does tie back to like the feminist movement in some aspects.
Cool.
So that was quite interesting. But the first article I found that really made me dive deep into it had a picture. So let me just give that to you for a second. So that is police matron Edith Burgess-Stresser. And she then married to be a Bracken, Bracken. So if you have, and her maiden name was Bell. So if you have a Bell, a Burgess-Stresser, or a Bracken in your family tree, this could be some information for you. She did not have children, though. So if you have her in your tree, she would have been like an aunt or cousin or something like that. So what was interesting for her, for this woman here, Edith, she became the police matron in 1919. So she applied for the position, and they had a group of women that applied, and they narrowed it down to 2. And it took the mayor a year to then decide on which of the 2 they were going to pick. Michelle's shaking her head. For those who can't see.
Of course. You can't pick a woman.
And what's really powerful, again, about the feminist movement in this era, and it was that this was the first women police matron of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I should note my article.
What year is it?
My article was from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the Evening News. It was published June 21st, 1920. So she applies and she gets this position. So for her, that's, I guess, pretty awesome that she gets to be part of this movement. She ended up being in this position until 1940.
Wow.
So she was in there for
years?
a long time.
Yeah. Wow.
She got the position, though, when she was in her late 40s. So she was born 1869 and she passed in 1961. So she was 92.
Wow.
Yeah,
awesome.
So she lived a great life. And so a little bit about her from different stories I was reading. They noted she kind of was dubbed a few titles. So she was quoted like a social worker with a police badge.
Okay.
Was one. She was quoted as a woman detective. And from what I read, she kind of was more with the detectives and the investigators department. And she was first, like there was an article about how the other police officers kind of took into her. They would kind of tone down their conversation and, they didn't know how to act around her, I guess, in the beginning. But towards the end, she was dubbed mom, and she would like bake them food I don't know, So that was interesting. But some of the things she was responsible for, I found quite interesting for the time. So she was responsible for visiting the dance halls and making sure that their hand placement of one another were in the right placement. And she found
who's assigning these like tasks?
The police. I don't know. The police department, the mayor was involved. There's like a civil.
Nothing better to do.
I know. And this was the time, I guess, was quoted in an article saying how astounding it was that This was the shimmy was coming out at this time, and what else? The squirm, which I honestly haven't even heard of.
Because this is like the flapper.
Yeah.
Arrow, right?
So she would go to these dance halls and make sure everyone was being appropriate, and she did have the power though to make arrests and close the dance halls if she saw too much going on.
Those frisky youth.
Oh yeah. And then she had to patrol like the streets, and she would go into the movie theaters and make sure that all the youth were, I think it was like 15 and under, were home by 9 p.m.
Okay.
There was an article once about like how many kids she would take home and how the percentage of parents that actually weren't home. It was quite interesting. And then she also kind of was really hired for the juveniles, although it was said that she would like have to pat down the women in the jails and do all of that, but she really was with the juveniles. And I think that she actually did a good job. And there was something else that she did, I'm trying to remember, but she really did help the community, and she seemed like she really wanted to help the youth as well. Except in this article, it seemed a little contradicting because, as a woman getting into your role kind of in the feminist movement, she didn't seem to be speaking so kindly about the bathing suits and the women and the youth. But I think what she was kind of getting at was that she would see less problems in the youth had these girls covered up with their bathing suits. It was the tone of the story. And so
did you see my eye roll?
Yeah.
If you guys didn't hear my eye roll, there was an eye roll.
There was an eye roll. And Edith was really against or for the rules that were in place for the bathing suits.
Yeah.
Now, let me just quickly show you a picture because I honestly had no clue about this. Have you heard of beach censors?
Wow. No, they would literally measure.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's
I never heard of that.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a picture of an older gentleman with a ruler measuring between the knee and the skirt of a bathing suit at a beach. But this was quite popular. Like, I found several stories about these beach censors. So
are they paid, or is this just like
I think they were paid patrolmen.
Volunteer to be
No, I think they're paid
so
position.
I can grab women's legs and measure, like do my community service.
No, I know.
What is that?
So just listen though, because here's an
sorry.
article.
Sorry.
I know, because I was shocked that this was a thing. So in 1915, there was this article from Oklahoma, right? Mm-hmm. And it says, here are some of the rules of 1915. Beach censors are busy is the title. So neither male or female bathers may lie on their backs on the sand.
Okay.
No one-piece bathing suits for men or women. Female bathers must wear stockings. No male person shall lie with the head in the lap of a woman companion or vice versa. And skirts must fall to within at least 3 inches of the knee. Isn't
All I
that...
can think of is Elf. 6
inches. And I was just like, okay. But then another one, really quick here, where is the one from 1917? Let's see if I can find that one. So here are some of the rules. So girls may go without sleeves, but not without stockings. Knitted bathing suits will be permitted if there are skirts. All skirts must approach the knees, and just how near the knees depends on the architecture of the wearer. What? Lifeguards will not be required in 1917 to require a ruler to measure the skirts. That is left to the individual of the bather. And the girls will be allowed more liberty in the line than plump maids. The color of the bathing suit costumes.
So we're like fat shaming people too? Is that what that is saying? Like just
I know. Color was also a thing. So now color was okay in 1917 in this particular state. I think this one came from Atlantic City.
Okay.
All white bathing suit robes, which were banned a few years ago because of their material clinging properties, may be worn next summer. Only they must be built of serge of some firm fabric guaranteeing not to cling. Any form of headgear to the feminine heart may be worn with the bathing costume, provided the surf bonnet is not so ornate that it interferes with the comfort of other bathers. The wearing of surf shoes is purely optional. Only girls, don't forget your stockings. So,
I was going to say, I was like, are they wearing shoes with these stockings? Because sand and stockings are not
going to go together.
Not thinking so great.
Yeah. So, I'm reading these. I'm just, having been in my 30s, thankful I never had to deal with this. And I find it funny, but then at the same time, it's like, can you imagine if that was like humiliating to people back then? Like, I don't know. But again, I'm feeling the era where women are sticking up for themselves, because I found a couple other articles where the girls gave it back to these patrolmen, and kind of gave them their 2 cents about how they thought about it.
Yeah.
So there was this one particular article where it was called no, not this one. It was called something about sunburns. So there was a beach censor, this was New Jersey, 1920, called Edward Shaw, and he came across a woman who had sunburnt legs, which he said told a tale of continued infractions on the rule of bathing without stockings. And she again stuck up for herself, but followed the rule and put her stockings up. But it just was like continued. There was another article, like it was just.
Did they get arrested though? Like,
so
what happens if if they decide
some got arrested? There was an article. Yeah, what was her name? So her name was Dr. Rosalie Ladova, and I did some more research on her, and I found an article where she did get arrested. Let me see if I can find my notes of where this was.
Doctors. Or not wearing
1913 in Chicago at Jackson Beach, which is Jackson Beach in Chicago is where there was an 1893 World Fair, which I originally started looking at, which was also very interesting. But that's a side note. So she did get arrested, and she had a crowd of people, said the article, following her to the police station. She was given bail by one of her friends who owned a local hotel, paid her bail, and the chief police officer kind of was on her side and said Chicagoans are getting too prudish, was how it was quoted. But the patrolman, his name was Pat, it's kind of, I saw Pat or Walter Straight was his name, but this went to court. He actually brought the items. She went into the beach. She had all her gear, whatever you want to call it, all her articles of clothing. And once she was in the water, she took off the skirt. And that's when he kind of wasn't happy with that.
But she's in the water. Like,
I know.
How closely are you watching this woman?
Seriously.
Like Creeper?
I know. So he actually brought the article of clothing that she discarded to the court case. So the chief was more on the other, on Rosalie's side. And also the judge, he did agree with her. Her whole stance was, it's not safe to be in the water with all that clothing. It's hard to swim. She was an avid swimmer. So, yeah, it was just, it was interesting. So she got bail. The court dropped the case. But that kind of leads me to how the original article, it specifically talked about the Annette Kellerman one-piece suit. So that was a very popular first bathing suit that was just one piece that came out.
Yeah.
I did find in the newspaper advertisements for this bathing suit. So I'll have to post those pictures, but kind of showed how they were selling them. But what's interesting about that one is this Annette came from Australia. She's actually, which is cool because I lived in Australia for a few years, so I was cool about that. She lived in Europe. She came to the United States. She was a diver, so she was doing competitions and things like that. And she she came in this one-piece bathing suit. It was said that she was arrested in Boston for wearing this one-piece bathing suit, but I couldn't find any articles that corroborated that. Yeah. But there was a couple articles about her, and again, pushing towards the movement that, hey, why do you guys have to be so rough on these bathing suits? So that was cool to kind of just see her journey with the bathing suit. So yeah, it was quite interesting to see all these things that I hadn't known about in history for women, and even finding out a little bit more about Edith, kind of go on this darker side of Edith and what she kind of would have been experienced as a police matron, you know.
Yeah.
I guess Philadelphia had women police officers, so they even offered for her to go back and do some training for a week with them to get, you know, some experience. But there was an article that she actually went undercover.
That's cool.
Yeah, for a case against a fortune teller, because I guess fortune telling was illegal, which is kind of another interesting part. So it was in 1922, and I guess the fortune teller told her she was going to lose her job, and then hours later,
hated that.
Oh yeah, hours later they came and arrested the fortune teller. So there was that. There was also a case that I read that it was a little boy, actually quite sad about how the stepmother was abusing him, and to the point where she put his hand in scalding butter, and it like really did a number on his hand. And she went to court and got accused of, you know, the abuse, whatever. So, you know, in her line of work, she definitely did a lot of good, it seemed, even though she might have been against some of the laws, and maybe she changed her tune when, you know, as time went on. But, you know, she also probably saw some crazy things.
Kind of a male-dominated
Yes.
field, so she either had to probably go with some things. Maybe she agreed, maybe she didn't agree,
Right.
but
Yeah.
like she was kind of trailing her own way into police work. So how do you kind of go against it? I get it, but I also like wish she would have stood up for
exactly, because you're
her fellow woman more.
Exactly. I agree. And then I kind of looked into it a little bit. The next so I guess they had hired, what was the date of that one? They had hired 6 meter oh gosh, what do you call them? Meter maids?
Meter maids?
Meter maids, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. So they had women in that case, but the next appointed female officer for Harrisburg, Pennsylvania wasn't until 1970. And I guess 2 of those meter maids eventually made it to police officers as well. But for the Harrisburg, PA people, that's some interesting history. And looking into Edith specifically, in the 1920th century, I saw she lived with her mother, and her sister lived with her as well. So she was the head of house. Her sister lived with her family, and there was 3 lodgers. And from what I could tell, there's like a long line of like her mom and her mom's mom and her dad's dad all came from Pennsylvania. So I couldn't quite get to where they kind of might have immigrated from.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a piece of history that I did not definitely know about, and interesting now that I...
Laws on bathing suits.
Yeah, and how people would literally look at you as like, oh gosh, you're not...
I wonder if men never got arrested for their...
Well, a lot of these articles, and I'm going to post them all because they're short and they are interesting, but a lot of these women specifically said, well, you'll see men on the beach doing da-da-da-da, you know? And from what I can tell, most of these beach censors were males.
Of course. And
you know.
Were they measuring the male suits or like commenting if they took off?
Exactly. I mean, none of the articles I found mentioned it was all...
Of course.
Yeah. So, as you can tell, me and Michelle are for the women here. But,
yes.
You know, so... Anyways, that's me.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so my story takes place in Maryland, in Baltimore. I feel like I've talked about Baltimore before. Like,
yeah.
I feel like it's going to be my place for some reason. But I focused on cooping. Have you ever heard of cooping?
Nope.
Okay.
Not at all.
Forced voting in the 19th century.
Oh.
So
it's quite an interesting word to align with that.
Yeah. So it's in the 1850s, 1865-ish.
The generation, you love that area.
I do. That Civil War, like 1800s is like, you know, where I seem to stay. But so cooping involved politicians. Scandal. Okay.
Here
we go. Of course,
yeah.
There's always a political scandal.
Yeah.
Paying gangs to kidnap men because, of course, women couldn't vote at this point. So and having them vote for a specific candidate or party group.
Oh, geez.
So they would pretty much force them to drink, drug their drinks.
What?
Gather these. They were usually immigrants because they didn't want them voting for like a conservative party. So
oh my gosh,
they were the groups were basically, they were called the nativists. So they wanted the Americans to vote versus the immigrant vote, right? So they would drug them, force to drink, and then disguise them. So they would have them all change clothes, wear different things, and they'd have like so there were judges when they would go to vote back then. So the judges would look at the ballot or the ticket and would say, like, this person, like, voted for this, whatever. So that judge was also in on it, usually.
Oh, my gosh.
So
that's a scandal, yep.
Yep. There were so many victims. So they're homeless, immigrants, and sometimes they always had the voting places in areas where it was, like, the wealthier areas of town. So, like, the immigrants would have to cross over, so they would be walking alone, so they would make easier victims. And so they would force them into these places where sometimes there were 40, 60, 80 people all penned in a room. That's what they called it.
Kidnapped or whatever?
Yes. So they'd kidnap them for a couple of days, and they'd make them...
for days?
Yeah. They'd make them vote continuously, sometimes like 8 or 10 times. They'd just say, give a fake name, here's your ticket, and then they'd go and they'd make them vote at different polling places.
That's crazy.
Isn't that nuts? So we found this. Actually, my husband Scott found it because it's kind of rumored that Edgar Allan Poe was a victim of cooping, because he was found like kind of drunk, passed out in a street area in Baltimore where these gangs and this was happening, and his cousin actually wrote an article blaming a specific gang for his demise. So,
wow.
Yeah. So it's a rumor, like there's no like actual
Now, do you think this went on in other states as well?
Oh yeah, New York. It was in Massachusetts. There was like connections with Boston. Yeah. So there's that movie, that Gangs of New York.
Okay.
So they kind of mention this specific gang called the Plug Uglies that were based in Baltimore. Yeah. Okay. So Plug Ugly. What do you think that is from? It took me, I was like, that's such a weird name, right? So there's a band called the Plug Uglies based in Baltimore, but it's...
I wonder if they know.
Of course they know. This is part of their history in Baltimore. It seems like a well-known group. So I did some name searching. So there was a group, they knew the names of the people in this group. They were pretty well-known ruffians, let's call them, thugs. The first firefighters to put out a fire were paid by the insurance companies. So it kind of caused this clash of groups to be the first to like knock the plug out of, they weren't hydrants like we have now, they were underground. And in the cities in like Baltimore and Boston, there was a cork basically underground where the water would be kind of closed off, and if there was a fire they could break in, they could either use an axe or some kind of corkscrew to pull it out. So basically the strongest, toughest guys would fight their way to get there first to put out the fires,
to get the insurance money.
To get the insurance money. So these like rival gangs kind of fought over who would
plugs.
be so that's like where these fire companies started, was like kind of helping people help them
for their money.
Right. So the engine crews controlled the water, would extinguish the fire. They would be the meanest, toughest goons, and to be at the front of the pack there. So they also were hired by the politicians though to like take people and push them into voting.
I'm shaking my head for those who are listening.
So there was so many articles based in the Baltimore Sun. There were
around the word cooping.
Yeah,
like, did you search
cooping.
the word cooping?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cooping, and then specific names of people
Okay.
as well. So there was a Paul Placidy who was in the paper a lot. So like
he was a politician?
No, he was in the Plug Uglies.
Oh.
So, and then there's even a Wikipedia page for like people who are in it and what
Wow.
they did and how they messed up elections, and like mayors who were in office shouldn't have been in office, but
That's so...
because they took over the voting, that's how it went out. So yeah,
Wow.
it's
So it sounds like, I mean, you think about, what, 1850 you said?
1860, 59, 60, yeah.
It's just interesting how a lot of these things haven't much changed. I mean, maybe they shaped differently, but how they're still...
Yeah, power and money
Yeah.
corrupt, basically.
Yeah.
Basically.
And don't you learn history so you don't repeat itself? And it sounds like maybe that's not true.
So I saw this editorial, and it basically was explaining to the public, like, Cooping. So it had, Cooping are the families of poor, hard-working, industrious men to be terrified and distressed by having their protectors, their husbands, their fathers, caught and imprisoned to gratify the interests of political villains. No rich man will be thus outraged. Are the sons of toil thus be trampled on? Will mechanics and laboring men submit to these outrages upon their class? Will they vote for a party that thus distresses, crushes, and degrades them? Shame, shame, shame. Are ye to be outraged because ye are poor?
Wow.
So it's calling kind of like a...
Can you imagine, though, being the person that got kidnapped to do this? Like, going against your will for a change that you don't want to happen. That's going to be so, like, just degrading and...
Yeah. Yeah, they came to, like, American dream, and then
Right.
they can't even have the free will to
Right.
do whatever. Yeah. So it's pretty bad. So Paul, let's go back to Paul Placidy here.
Because, of course, he's got a record, so...
Okay, yep. So he was charged with cooping and robbing Joseph Burns. So Joseph was a kind of older gentleman, and Paul and another kind of cornered him, robbed him, and then pushed him into one of those like cooping areas where he was kidnapped. And there was an article that even had poor Joseph Burns walking by a group of police officers and saying, "Help me, help me."
Oh my gosh.
And they just, he was pointing to his like gray hair and saying like he couldn't protect himself.
What?
And they just laughed at him.
Oh my...
So the police weren't on it.
What?
Like they just was just like rampant in Baltimore.
This is so bad.
Right? Like they were
That's
just like,
bad.
You're going to do what they're...
Oh my gosh.
They probably felt powerless too.
Right.
Like...
Right, they don't want to get the gangs that... Like,
Yeah.
they're probably in numbers
Yeah.
stronger than they are.
And so he was held in jail. So once they caught this Paul after he was charged, but then they had a trial for him, and they were like, oh, there's no proof of it.
Oh,
so he
please.
gets let go. Okay. So I do some more digging, and you know, on Ancestry you look at... So I looked at Paul Placidy, and he only lived to be about 42. He died in 1875, and he got consumption, tuberculosis.
Karma.
And
Just kidding.
they said he had it for about 2 years. And then I look and I see, oh, he had a wife. Oh, that's fine. And he had a son. Okay. But you know how old his wife was?
Okay, so he died at 42?
Yeah.
Older or younger? Younger?
Oh, much younger.
Oh, God, don't tell me like 18.
So he was born in 1833.
Okay.
And she was born in 1850.
Oh.
So, yeah.
That is so wrong. He probably...
So I'm thinking, like, so when this is going on, he's getting, like, arrested. She's only, like, 8 or 9 years old.
Wow.
That's
wrong.
Yeah. So he kind of reminds me of someone else we're going to talk about in the future.
Oh, yes. Yeah, something's wrong.
With the child bride and the...
Oh, yeah,
the
something's
whole,
wrong.
he's not a good character.
Wow.
So Paul Placidy, and then I look back and I see his father's name is Henry. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
And I check Find a Grave.
Yeah.
And they have this vault. This
Wow.
absolutely looks so expensive. Like the Placidy Vault in Baltimore. There's like the whole family is in the vault. I'm like, wow, they must have had money. So I look, and Henry was also known to be a cooping. So he was also part of the
so
gang.
learn from your... This is,
yeah.
Right. This is an example then. Have you just learned from... That's not right.
Generational issues. So Henry was also, and then Henry's father's name was Paul.
Okay.
And he came over from France. So they were French. And this nativist Plug Uglies gang was very they didn't like the Irish Catholics. So there were like conflicting Irish Catholic gangs and the French. So I'm like, your grandfather was an immigrant, but you don't like other immigrants.
Right. So now you're doing, that just makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. But I guess corruption and the money and power of others just take hold. So I was looking at the locations. So there's a Holiday Street with double L. So I looked that up. And there's old buildings. There's even an old hotel that says it's kept historical from the 1840s. Oh, and cool. I was looking at cool pictures. So
I love that.
I'm gonna send that to you too. It was pretty cool looking at it and thinking this is where these people lived. And then there's a book that was written in 2005 about, it was called The Hanging of Henry Gambrel.
Okay.
And he was also part of the Plug Uglies.
I just can't laugh every time you say that name.
It's really hard to say too. I've had to practice. So he was part of this gang, and there were numerous accounts of him causing issues, and there was a cop that ended up getting killed, and then he was there when it happened, and there was articles saying that police officer had seen him do other things to another police officer. So there was were they trying to hush this cop? That ended up so it was just, and he ended up hanging. The judge finally
said, this is a stop. We need to stop this.
I think the police having been killed, it caused kind of we have to do something about it.
It took that long. Jeez.
Yeah. But some of the articles were painting him as poor Henry, he was this handsome young whatever, and then they had stories of his dad coming and he was crying and distraught.
Well, you gotta you do something, you have a consequence.
And I'm so did he not do it? But then no, there was 20 eyewitnesses saying that this happened, and I don't know.
That's crazy. How many people were in the gang?
A lot. There was only about 10 names in the Wikipedia, but it seems it was a pretty well-known issue in Baltimore.
Wow.
And this
I never heard of that.
Uglies. Yeah, they were.
My husband went to school for history, and he likes history. I'm going to have to ask him if he knows this, what this means.
Cooping, yeah. So he ended up, Henry, his dad.
And where, so I know you said they take him to these houses or these holding places. Were they in houses? Were they did they describe, were they paying rent for these random buildings that they just...
They called them shacks, and they pen them in basements or somewhere where and they were drugged too, so they wouldn't know
terrifying.
Where to go, where they were.
Especially if they were an immigrant who maybe didn't know how to read and write or speak English well. They probably just were so confused about what was happening to them.
And they'd have to empty out their pockets, so they'd have to dump all their money out. So they got robbed too, and they didn't have
terrifying.
Their paper. They take their paperwork of naturalization or just totally ruin it for them.
That's bad.
Yeah. It's almost quite a scandal, I would say.
I would say, yeah.
So they, there was others. There was a Henry Funk who was robbed. There was a Francis Arnold who was arrested for that. So there's numerous accounts. You could just search Cooping, and it goes on and on and on. Specifically, Baltimore was
I'd be interested to find people who maybe had their ancestors be one of the people who got robbed or kidnapped, or B, part of the gang, and just it'd be interesting to see if they were told stories over time. Yeah. Of their side of it, Yep.
Because it seems that Placidia family was pretty that. Henry had 10 children. So
wow, there's lots of ancestors floating around.
Yeah, they're probably still. The gang stuff ended in 1865. There was a change of parties, and they kind of cracked down on the corruption. So That's good.
Yeah.
That's good at
Unless
least.
it's done.
And I think a lot of them had to get drafted into the Civil War.
Oh, true,
too,
right.
So that caused like a kind
a
of
stop at the end.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. Good art. Good find.
Yeah, it was.
Go Scott.
Yeah,
And Michelle for doing all the research.
Yeah. I have some good pictures too. They had, not like photographs, but they would have drawings in the newspaper of the rioting and the groups with the interesting hats. The Plug Uglies wore the hats. Yeah.
Ooh, I'll be curious to see that. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great find for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us this week. If you know any scandals in your own family, let us know. Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.